Hello, and welcome to Michell Consulting's webinar series for our Michell University. Today we're going to be working with SAP Business One, and we're going to be going over the concept of an internal reconciliation. This webinar is being recorded. It'll be available on our website, so you can visit us at www.michellgroup.com to see this, plus the other training videos we have. Today we're going to be working with SAP Business One version 9.0. This version we're going over today is the latest version, but the concept of the internal reconciliations is in the older versions as well. So let's talk about what we mean by internal reconciliations in SAP. In SAP, the data is never really deleted from the system, which means when we enter an invoice or credit or payment, it stays in the system. So what happens is, in a typical scenario, and we're going to talk about the business partners today, we enter an invoice, and the invoice is in the system, and then the invoice gets paid. So if we look at the business partner's aging, he no longer owes this payment. So we can have it seen. Now, it doesn't get removed. Some systems will actually remove it at month end. It becomes reconciled. So there's two types of reconciliation. There's system reconciliations, which are done internally by SAP. For example, when we do an incoming payment and we pay an invoice from a customer, that payment is internally reconciled to the invoice, but it's a system reconciliation, which means it was done by SAP. The other thing, the manuals, or what we call internal reconciliations, allows us to do that. So we can then take a credit memo and apply it. So we're going to go over these concepts today. They're available for the general ledger as well as the business partners, aging. We're going to focus more on the business partners since it's typically used here, but you can also do it in the financials. The concept's the same. We'll focus first on the business partner, and then we'll do one on the financials so we can see. So let's talk about what we mean by the data not being erased. We're going to go into business partners, business partner master data, and we're going to call up a customer. Let's go ahead here and let's call up Earthshaker. And here we have the account balance. So we can see here that this customer owes us this money. This is the open balance or the outstanding aging, $628,000. If we click here into the system, you can see we have invoices and payments, and we have an option here, display unreconciled transactions only. So if you notice right now, I do not have that turned on. So I'm looking at everything. You can see that I have this invoice here for $12,535. You can see that I have a payment here for $12,000, and you can see the balance is zero. If I open up this invoice, and you can see this is pretty old. So this invoice was paid. You can see here it's an AR invoice. You can see the status is closed. You can see there's an amount applied. So it's zero. So this AR invoice number 3 was paid with this incoming payment number 4. So we can see here, and again, we can see the payment. So that is what's known as a system reconciliation. Okay, if I go here and I say display unreconciled transactions only, since that's a system reconciliation similar to an internal reconciliation, you will see that all these balance dues with zero, all here, are going to go away. So if I click this, you can see now you don't have that. So this is the actual aging. This is what makes up the 628. This is what is open or not reconciled. So once again, you can see the information here. If I uncheck that, you can see the information here. We can also do a right-click on the line. We can look at Apply Transactions. And again, we can see that this invoice, the applied transaction, is the payment. So we have that. So these are called system reconciliations. These are done by the actual system. If there was a mistake, I really can't undo this reconciliation. I would have to go in to the incoming payment here, and I would have to go into data and cancel the incoming payment and reverse it. So that's a typical system reconciliation here. Now, what we can also do what's known as internal reconciliations, which we can do here, which allow us to manually do this. So typically this would be done like we have an on-account payment, or the customer has an invoice and then he has a credit. So because there's no internal link, since SAP didn't do the system reconciliation, for example, in SAP I didn't go into the incoming payment and select the invoice, those will always be on the aging. The customer will still have a zero balance, but you'll always see this. We want to basically remove those. And that's done here with the internal reconciliation button. So let's find an example. Let's actually do a couple here. Let's actually just kind of do, let's do an on-account payment. And we're going to go ahead so we can apply that. And we'll also do a credit. So let's do a couple of those so we can see how it works. So we're going to go here into banking, incoming payments, incoming payments. So we're going to go and call up our customer Earthshaker. Okay. Now normally what we would do is when we paying normally, see by us selecting this invoice here and then paying it, that's how the system reconciliation is going to work. It's going to know that incoming payment 112 was applied to this AR invoice 265. In this case, we're not going to select anything. We're going to do an on-account payment, and we're going to put in, say, $15,000. We're going to go to our payment means. And let's say we're going to do that with a, let's do just a bank transfer. Let's go here and select the, see what we have for banks. Put this against to this. We use today's date. And we're just going to right-click, copy balance due. So we're going to enter a payment. I'm going to click OK. We're going to add this. If we see here, we see we have an incoming payment for the amount, and it's not really affecting anything. So this is something that we're going to use for an internal reconciliation. We can also do the same with a credit. So let's just, before we go into the internal reconciliations, let's just enter a credit memo. So we're going to do the same thing. We're going to call up Earthshaker. And let's go here, and we'll leave it at 400. Let's just make this exempt. We don't have tax. And we're going to take our discount out. We're going to have here, we're just going to have, let's make this 100 of them. So we're also going to have a $15,000 credit. Okay, we're going to add this. So now we have those in the system. So we have a payment and a credit that will not done in an internal reconciliation. Now normally in an internal reconciliation, in the case of a credit, we would actually go in, and there's more detail if you want to see our webinar about the document relationship. Normally when we would do a credit memo, in order to do a system reconciliation, we would go here. Let's say we're doing a credit again for Earthshaker, and he's returning merchandise that he bought on a previous bill. We can do a copy from AR invoices, and then we can go ahead and select an AR invoice. And you can see now that in the link. So if we go ahead and add this one, this would be the concept of a system reconciliation. So what we're doing is when we're creating the credit memo, we're saying this credit memo belonged to that invoice, as opposed to us just creating the credit memo. So if you see here, if we right-click and look at the relationship map, you can see that we have the credit memo being applied to the invoice. So here we see this link. Okay? We see everything involved in here. And this is a typical system reconciliation, because if I look at these two, and we'll see how they're linked internally, as opposed to If I go back one, this AR credit, and I look at the relationship map, there's no link. This is just a credit memo that was done. Okay, so we have a credit memo here, and this isn't a link to anything. So this one by itself would be no, it's not internal reconciled. And the other one would be an internal reconciliation. And again, we can see that if we go to the business partner. So let's go to the business partner. Let's go to Earthshaker. Click our account balance. And let's see on the posting date, and let's put let's just set this. I'm going to set that as my posting date. Again, I just want to have less data on the screen so we can see. So again, you can see the same thing here. You can see that if I say display unreconciled transactions only, I'm going to see the ones. So here you can see that information. Again, let's deselect that for a minute, because you can see here these two credits that came in. The second credit here, number 13, notice it has a 0 balance. And if I right-click and look at the applied transaction, that is because when I was doing the credit memo, I did copy from the invoice. So that's the system reconciliation within the system. These two here have nothing. So if I right-click and I look at the applied transactions, I'm empty. So now what we're going to do is we have this, and what we want to do is we want to now apply it to some old invoices. Let's say there's we'll start first with the incoming payment. Let's say the customer gave us $15,000, and he says just apply it to the oldest invoices. So let's do that. We can do it directly from here in the internal reconciliation, which we'll do today. It's also available if you go in the menu itself here under internal reconciliations. We can do it here. Okay, let's just do it from here. It just makes it easier because we have the aging on the screen. We're going to look at internal reconciliations. Now, when doing the internal reconciliations, it's important on the reconciliation date. The reason being is one of the nice features of SAP is because no data is erased, I can go back anytime and reprint my aging. What happens in a lot of older systems, there's typically a month-end process, and the month-end process removes all the zeroed out or all the paid invoices, and they're gone. And then what happens is somebody comes in and says, oh, I need to run the aging from 2 months ago. And I can't because all that data is gone. Here with SAP, I can do that. I can run the aging back in time, and the system knows based on all these dates. So if let's say I run it back on January, it knows all the invoices entered after January not to include, and all the reconciliations before to include, and so on. So it's important on this reconciliation date, again, for that. Because sometimes people what may want to do is they've made some of these credits and payments were done over the last 3 months. They just never did it. And they come in here one day and say, you know what, let me just reconcile everything today. And then the problem is when I go back to reprint the agings, they'll kind of be out of balance. It won't match. So if you do this, it's a good best practice to actually reconcile based on the date. And typically, once that incoming payment comes in and we're going to apply it, we would do it that way. So we're just going to use today's date. But again, that's important when you're doing it. You can also see we can actually also add adjustments down here as well. Let's go in here and let's just make this field a little bigger so we can see. So we're going to go in and we're going to say, okay, we're going to take this incoming payment, this RC112 here, and we're going to apply it. Now the key is when we apply, you can see here we have the balance and the amount to reconcile. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to do an example with the small one. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, let's say this 15,000, we want to put it against this invoice. Let's say this invoice, this one, this one, this one, this one, until you can see down here until I run out of money. So let's say now I have the 874 left over. 871.44. So I'm just going to change the amount to reconcile to 871.44, and I'm going to select that. I'm going to select that. Didn't select it. So what we're doing here is we're showing the 0. The key is this has to be equal to 0. So now I'm going to click Reconcile. And you can see how I reconcile those transactions. Okay, they're no longer here. I can also do adjustments here if I want. I can create a journal entry and add an incoming and outgoing payment. Again, these are just adjustments. If something was, how to do it kind of on the fly, you can do it this way as well. So let's go back. And now let's look here at this information. So again, now we can see that the incoming payment here is now 0. Right? It's been applied. So if we right-click on this document, and we look at the applied transactions, we can see how it was applied. So you can see we paid all these invoices, and this one here, that was 1,086. We applied the 871, so we have an open balance of 214. Okay, and again, we would see that in here. We have all these other dates, but we would see that in here. If we again unselect display reconcile transactions only, you notice that that information is not here. Again, you don't see that incoming payment we just did. So we have that information here. And again, you can see all the information here because we displayed unreconciled transactions. We have the same here. Here's another one that had the applied transactions. So you can see again, here's the amount, and here's everything we applied on that incoming payment. We can also do the same thing here with this credit. We want to do a simple credit against the whole thing. Again, we can go to internal reconciliations. We're going to grab the credit, which I always like to do it first so I see the amount. And I'm going to do a simple one here. I'm going to take something, this one here, an amount to reconcile, 15, like that. So it's a partial pay. I'm just going to click Reconcile. Yeah, very simple. You can see now it's reconciled. If we go out of here, and again, we display unreconciled transactions only, you can see that we don't see it. These are the ones that are unreconciled only. And you can see that invoice we did on 3/19, you can see here the balance due is this amount. Again, if we look at this transaction, the general ledger, if we look at the transaction, you can see the amount applied. And this also holds true here. If you're in the AR invoice, you can go to the applied transactions, and you can see it here on an individual invoice as well. So you can see what we applied. We applied here the 15,000 to this amount. So the total was 116,000. We applied 15, so we have the 101. Yeah, very simple to work with. That's how we do it. We can do the same thing with the credits and so on internally. Now, if we made a mistake, let's go in here and let's say how we want to now back this stuff out. All right, so what we can do is we can go into the internal reconciliation menu under Business Partners. And again, the reconciliation is just the same screen, except here you would have to go in and select the business partner because we're not actually in the business partner, but it's the same principle. It's just going to call up the same screen as we were just in. So now let's look at Manage Previous Reconciliations. Let's go here and let's put the reconciliation date. It's just the number, so we want all the numbers. And let's look at, so we're looking at everything for the business partners. And again, you can see business partners and GL accounts. We want to see everything from the business partner that was reconciled on that date. Right, and we see here that the example we did just now is, remember we had that credit memo here. That's a system reconciliation. You can see the reconciliation type is credit memo. That's what the system did. You'll also notice that the cancel reconciliation button is grayed out. Okay, that means it was done internally by the system. So in order for me to reverse that, I would have to go in and cancel the documents because they're done internally. I can't unlink it. But however, if I click on the manual reconciliation, okay, again, you see everything here, but you have the ability of doing this cancel. So these are the two right here. So we have this one, and if we cancel, it's going to undo it. So let's just cancel the smaller one here. So this is the $15,000 credit that we put against the invoice. So remember now, if we look at the invoice, which is invoice 274, we see down here that we have the amount applied. So we're going to now just cancel this because we made a mistake. We're just going to say cancel, and now you can see it's canceled. So now if I go back to the invoice, you can see that the amount applied is gone and it's here. And it tracks it in the system. So let's go back into the business partner, and let's call up Earthshaker again. And you can see here that now when I turn this off and on, you can see the 116 is here and the information's here. And if I right-click on this and I look at the applied transaction, you're going to see the ins and outs. So you're going to see that we had this $116,000 that we applied this invoice, and you can see the amount applied. We can see the positive, the in and out, the positive and negative. So again, we just canceled that so we can open it up again. We'll do the same with the other one. You can see the effect of transactions. So again, we're going to go to Manage Previous Reconciliations. We're going to click OK. And again, we can still see that that was canceled, so we have that audit trail in our system. Remember, in SAP, nothing is ever deleted. It's always there in some form. So now we're going to go to this one right here. This big one, and if we cancel the reconciliation, again, you can see that was canceled. So again, let's go back to the business partner. And because we canceled it, we can just go in and do it again, because maybe we selected the wrong stuff, the wrong invoices. So we can see here that we're open again. So if we go to this payment, and we look at the applied transactions, again, now we can see the applied transactions. Where's this one here? And again, you can see the cancellation of the information. On this one, and again, we can see the information here. So what this allows us to actually go in and remove it and go back and take it on. So again, the internal reconciliation, it works the same way in the financials. Typically, it's not done so much in the financials, but for example here, let's go to the chart of accounts and let's look at, let's find an account here. And again, we're just looking at these transactions. Again, if we right-click, we can look at the applied transaction, the deposit, but we can actually do this internal reconciliations as well, and we can do the same. Typically, it's not done this time. It can be done if you have, a lot of ins and outs, and you want to just clean up how how it behaves. Notice we're not posting anything because we're not really affecting anything. We're just canceling ins and outs. So technically, we could do this if we wanted to. We can say take this one and this one, and amount to reconcile. We could put the 14. Again, it's not really used that much, but we can do it. The only reason why we would do it here in the general ledger, and we do have some clients that will do it, is just because the same principle of this display unreconciled transactions only. Again, they may have like expense accounts set up, or typically I had a client that had for travel and reimbursement to customers, they wanted to just clear that up to make it easy to look at. But again, the principle is exactly the same from the financial, which is the general ledger, versus the business partner. But again, it's used mostly on the business partner side. Okay, so let's recap what we've gone over today. Today we talked about the internal reconciliation process in SAP. When we talk about reconciliations, we talk about linking documents. Typically, in this case, we're linking an invoice to a payment or an invoice to a credit memo and so on. There's two types of reconciliations. There's the system reconciliation, which SAP does in the background. So we saw that when we enter a payment and we say that this payment is for this invoice, it's going to be internally reconciled. Same thing when we do a credit memo. If we enter a credit memo and we say that this credit memo is for this invoice, we use the copy from. Again, that internal link is a system reconciliation. The system reconciliations cannot be manually, since they're not manual, they can't be deleted. You'd have to go in and delete the payment and so on. The other type of internal reconciliations are what's known as the manual reconciliations, what we did today. That's when I, as the user, determine what I want to do. And this is typically done, we have an on-account payment. Okay, at the time, there was no invoices selected, so we had that on-account payment. And then later in the fact, we're going to say, okay, take this payment and apply it to these invoices. Maybe the client has a credit that was entered without an invoice and so on. And that's all done through the business partner. And again, we could do it directly from the business partner master itself or through the internal reconciliations. So again, we're going to look at our earth shaker. And again, there's the concept of the display unreconciled transactions only. So again, if you look here, you can see the difference. If I uncheck this, I'm only looking for stuff that was posted in March. And again, you can see the balance due with zeros. When I click on display unreconciled transactions only, you'll see that all the balance due zeros will go away. Again, that's being because we applied that. We know that if we right-click on the line and we look at the applied transactions, we can see it here. This invoice was done with a credit. If we actually open up the document, we can do it within the document itself, so we can see that there's an applied amount and the balance due is zero. If we want to see what the applied amount was, say we're looking at this invoice, was this a credit or is this a payment? We would just right-click, look at the applied transactions, and I can see it was done with the credit. We also see that in the relationship map of the document. Again, since it's an internal or system, you can see here that it was done invoice credit. You can see the link here. And again, those are systems. If we do it manually, again, we have the ability of just going into the internal reconciliations, and we can select what we want to do. Like you can see these journal entries here. Again, let's clean this up. So let's say we're going to take these journal entries here. So down below we have an amount of 124, and we're going to apply that to, say, this invoice. We can do that. Again, this has to be zero. If this is not zero, it's not going to let me reconcile until this is actually zero. So if I do that and I try to click reconcile, you're going to get a warning, reconciliation difference must be zero. So we're just going to go back to this one again, this one here. Again, once this is zero, we can go ahead and we can click reconcile. And again, we're done. So if we look, we can see that, again, we take the posting date off here. If we click this, again, we can see what we've done. And you can see this is the 39. I believe this is the one we did. So again, if we look here, we can see that of the 163, we applied the 124. Again, we can also right-click, look at the applied transactions within the document. Again, you can see everything here. Again, all the ins and outs, whatever got closed, and so on. And then we can also manage previous reconciliations. Again, these if we want to delete the, or just look at them. But if we want to delete the manual ones, if we go to manage reconciliations, again, I'm just going to use today's date. So again, you can see this is the manual one we've just done. You can see the status manual. Again, this is a credit memo. This is a system reconciliation. Because of this, you can see I cannot cancel the reconciliation. It's grayed out, but if I click on this line, I can go ahead and cancel this information. These actually were cancellations of these. So notice when I go here, I also can't do the cancel. The reason why, I've already canceled it. So if you see that each one creates a transaction. So reconciliation 303 got canceled by reconciliation 305. And reconciliation 304 got canceled by 306. But if I go here, then since this is new, see, I can cancel this reconciliation. Okay, so that concludes today. Again, what we've learned today is how the internal reconciliation works in SAP Business One. As we said, this webinar is being recorded. It'll be available on our website. You can visit us at www.michellgroup.com to view this, plus our other webinars in our training series. And once again, we thank you for your time.